Clara Whitmore's hands trembled as she loaded the rifle. Not from cold, though the November wind cut through the cabin walls like a blade. Not from fear, though fear lived in her bones now, constant as breathing. Her hands shook because she was deciding whether to point this gun at the stranger on her porch, or at her own desperation. The knock came again. 3 measured raps. Patient. Like the man behind the door had all the time in the world, and knew Clara had none, Miss Whitmore. The voice was low, careful. My name is Thomas Merrick. I rode 3 days to speak with you. I mean no harm. Clara glanced at her father's bed across the room. Thomas Whitmore lay still, his breathing wet and shallow. 3 days, the doctor had said. Maybe 4 if they were lucky. But luck had abandoned this family years ago, left them stranded in this Colorado valley with nothing but debt and dying. She crossed to the window, rifle ready, and pulled back the flour sack curtain. The man who stood in her yard was tall, lean in the way of men who'd forgotten to eat regularly. He wore a canvas coat stained with trail dust, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. But it was his face that made Clara pause. Weathered, yes. Worn by sun and wind and something deeper. But his eyes looked like her father's. Like they'd seen something die and never stopped watching it happen. Thomas Merrick stepped back from the door without being asked. Hands visible and empty. A man who understood fear. Who'd maybe caused enough of it to recognize the signs. Clara opened the door a crack. The rifle barrel found the gap. I'm not here to save you, Miss Whitmore. Thomas Merrick's voice carried no romance, no hero's certainty. Just tired honesty. I'm here because I need saving. The words landed wrong. Backwards. Men didn't ride into the mountains confessing weakness. Men didn't stand in strangers' yards asking to be rescued. Then you came to the wrong place. Clara kept the rifle steady. I can't even save myself, I know. Something shifted in his expression. Not pity. Recognition. I asked about you. In town. At the general store. Mr. Harris told me about your father's illness. About the debt. About the Calhoun brothers coming to collect. He paused. He also told me you've been keeping this place running with almost nothing. That you haven't quit, haven't broken, haven't asked for charity you couldn't repay. Is that supposed to impress you? It tells me you're strong enough for what I'm offering. Clara's finger tightened on the trigger. And what's that? Marriage. Legal and binding. My name for your partnership. Security for your honesty. The word hung in the cold air between them like frost. Marriage. The thing Clara had refused once before, 15 years ago, when Daniel Vance had offered her everything, wealth, status, escape from poverty, and she'd said no because she couldn't stomach the thought of being owned. 3 days later, Daniel had put a gun to his head, left a note that said, if I cannot have you, I have no reason to live. His family had made sure everyone knew whose fault it was. I don't need a husband. Clara's voice came out harder than she intended. I need money and time, neither of which you're offering. I'm offering both. Thomas Merrick pulled an envelope from his coat, held it where she could see. $400. Enough to pay your father's debt twice over, with enough left for medicine, firewood, food through winter. He paused. And I'm offering you a place where your father can die warm. Instead of freezing in a cabin with holes in the roof. The truth of it stung more than the cold. Why? Clara demanded. Why me? Why any of this? Thomas Merrick was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of something he'd been holding too long. Because I'm tired of being alone. Because I've made mistakes I can't undo, and I need someone strong enough to keep me from making them again. His gray eyes met hers through the crack in the door. Because I was raised to believe marriage meant obedience, and that belief killed someone I loved. I won't make that mistake twice. The last sentence dropped like a stone down a well. Clara heard the splash of it. The depth, come inside. She lowered the rifle. But I keep this close, and if you try anything, you'll shoot me. I know. Thomas Merrick removed his hat as he stepped across the threshold. I'd expect nothing less. The cabin's interior told its own story. One room serving as kitchen, parlor, sick room. Shelves nearly empty. Furniture worn past repair. A life stripped down to its thinnest elements, still trying to hold. Thomas Merrick's gaze swept the space with the same recognition Clara had seen in his eyes. Not judgment. Understanding. He'd seen poverty before, maybe worn it himself, Mr. Merrick. Thomas Whitmore's voice rasped from the bed. My daughter's got more sense than to trust a stranger making promises. She does, sir. Thomas moved to the bedside, not too close. Respectful of the distance sick men need. Which is why I'm not promising love or romance or any of the usual lies men tell women to get them to alter. He glanced at Clara. I'm promising partnership. Work in exchange for security. Honesty instead of pretension. That's a strange proposal. It's the only one I can make in good conscience. Clara's father studied the stranger with eyes that had learned to read men in harder times than these. What happened to your wife? The question landed like a blow. Clara saw it in the way Thomas Merrick's shoulders tensed, the way his jaw tightened. She died 3 years ago. Childbirth. The baby too. I'm sorry for your loss, don't be. Thomas's voice went flat, dead. It was my fault. The silence that followed felt like something sacred and terrible. Clara watched this stranger confess murder, maybe not legal murder, but the kind that lived in a man's chest and ate him from the inside. You killed her? Clara heard herself ask, yes. No justification. No excuse. Just the word, naked and true. Then why would I marry you? Thomas Merrick turned to face her fully. In the cabin's dim light, she could see the lines around his eyes, the gray threading his dark hair. A man carrying weight that showed, because I learned. Because I spent 3 years alone on a ranch 30 miles from anywhere. Learning what it costs to love your pride more than you love another human being. His voice stayed steady, but something in it trembled. Because I'm offering you something most men never offer their wives, the right to tell me when I'm wrong. The power to challenge me. The freedom to leave if I fail you. That's not marriage. That's, Clara struggled for the word, partnership. Thomas finished. The kind built on mutual need and mutual respect. The kind that might survive because it's not built on fantasy. Clara looked at her father, who'd closed his eyes but was clearly listening. Looked at the envelope still in Thomas Merrick's hand. Looked at the rifle she'd set down but could still reach. How long do I have to decide? I need to leave by dawn. The pass closes soon, and I can't risk being trapped on the wrong side when the snow comes heavy. Thomas set the envelope on the table between them. The money's yours regardless of your answer. For your father's care. No strings. Why would you do that? Because I remember what it's like to have no choices. His expression softened slightly. And because whether you marry me or not, your father deserves to die in peace, not in debt. The kindness of it broke something in Clara's chest. She turned away so he wouldn't see her face crumple. There's a line shack half a mile down the trail, she managed. You can shelter there tonight. I'll have an answer by morning. Thomas Merrick nodded once and moved toward the door. At the threshold, he paused. Miss Whitmore. Whatever you decide, know this, I asked for you specifically. Not any capable woman. You. Because strength like yours is rare, and I need it more than I need comfort or beauty or any of the things most men think they want in a wife. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Clara alone with her father and an impossible choice. Don't do it for me. Thomas Whitmore's voice cut through the silence. Clara. Don't sacrifice yourself for a dying man. You're not dying. The lie tasted bitter. We both know I am. He coughed, wet and rattling. And if you do this, do it because you think it's your best chance. Not mine. Clara moved to sit beside his bed, setting the rifle within reach. Habit. What's my best chance look like, Papa? Stay here and hope the cowhounds show mercy when you're gone. Try to make it through winter alone when I can barely keep us fed now. There might be other men. Men, better than a man who admits he killed his wife and takes responsibility for it. Clara heard the edge in her own voice. Better than someone offering partnership instead of ownership. Her father was quiet for a long moment. Tell me about Daniel. The name landed like a fist. Clara hadn't spoken it aloud in years. That's not fair. Life's not fair. Death's not fair. But you've been carrying that boy's ghost for 15 years, and it's made you afraid of your own choices. Her father's hand found hers, his grip weak but insistent. Tell me, so Clara told him. About Daniel Vance's proposal when she was 17. About his family's wealth and her poverty and the way he'd looked at her like she was something to be acquired, collected, displayed. About saying no because she'd rather starve than be someone's possession. About the gunshot 3 days later. About the note that made her responsible for a suicide. About the way Daniel's mother had screamed at her funeral, "You murdered my son." About 15 years of whispers and blame and the weight of a death she didn't cause but couldn't escape. And now you're afraid, her father said quietly, that if you refuse this man's offer, you'll kill him too, aren't I? Clara's voice broke. Isn't that what I do? Refuse help and watch people die because of it? No. Her father's grip tightened. Daniel Vance killed himself because he was weak and selfish and couldn't accept that women aren't property. That's not your fault. That's his. His family didn't see it that way. His family were fools, and so was I for letting them make you believe their lies. He coughed again, harder. Listen to me, Clara. Thomas Merrick isn't offering to save you. He's offering partnership. That's different. That's two people choosing to face the world together instead of alone. What if I'm not strong enough? You've been strong enough to keep me alive for 2 years past when I should have died. Strong enough to face poverty without breaking. Strong enough to hold that rifle on a stranger and demand truth instead of pretty words. Her father's eyes found hers. You're strong enough for this. The question is, do you want it? Clara thought about the long winter ahead. About her father's final days in this cold cabin. About the cowhounds coming to collect with their hard smiles and legal papers. About 15 years of guilt and isolation and the slow suffocation of having no choices. No future, no hope. She thought about Thomas Merrick's tired eyes and honest confession. About a man who'd killed through arrogance and learned through grief. About partnership instead of romance, respect instead of ownership. She thought about dying slow here, or gambling on something that might be worth the risk. I want it, she heard herself say. God help me, I want it. Dawn came cold and clear, painting the mountains in shades of gold and shadow. Clara stood in the yard, dressed in her best dress, which wasn't saying much, patched wool the color of old blood, holding her father's rifle and watching Thomas Merrick approach from the lined shack. He'd brought a second horse. A gentle-looking mare with kind eyes. For you, he said simply. The trail's too rough for wagon, Clara nodded, not trusting her voice yet. Behind her, the cabin door stood open. Her father visible in his bed, raised on pillows so he could watch his daughter leave. Thomas counted out money with careful deliberation. 200 for the cowhounds. 100 for medicine and provisions. Another 100 just in case. He pressed the bills into Thomas Whitmore's hands. I'll see she's taken care of, sir, you do that. Her father's voice was stronger than it had been in days. Because if anything happens to my girl, I'll find a way to haunt you from the grave. I'd expect nothing less. Then it was time. Clara knelt beside her father's bed one final time, breathing in the familiar smell of him, sickness and smoke and bay rum from better days. I love you, Papa. I love you too. His hand touched her hair, gentle. You're stronger than you know. Don't ever forget that. Clara stood before her courage could fail. Shouldered the small bag that held everything she owned. Picked up the rifle her father had insisted she take, walked out of her old life and into the unknown. Thomas helped her mount with efficient courtesy, his hands brief and impersonal on her waist. Then he swung onto his own horse and turned them northeast, toward mountains that rose like a wall against the morning sky. Clara didn't look back. Couldn't bear to see her father's figure growing smaller in the doorway. Instead, she focused on the man riding ahead, straight-backed and silent, leading her toward a future neither of them could predict. They rode for hours without speaking, following a trail that climbed steadily into rougher country. Pine forests and rocky slopes. Air growing colder, thinner, sharper with each mile. Clara's legs ached from the unfamiliar saddle, but she gritted her teeth and rode on. Thomas had been clear about what he needed: capability, endurance, someone who wouldn't quit. She'd be damned if she proved him wrong on the first day. Around midday, Thomas called a halt near a creek. He helped her dismount, then saw to the horses while Clara stretched her protesting muscles. "There's jerky and hardtack in the saddlebag," he said, not looking at her. "We'll make better time if we eat in the saddle, but I figured you might need a break." "I'm fine." Thomas glanced at her then, really looked at her for the first time since they'd left. "You don't have to prove anything to me, Clara. I already know you're strong." The use of her first name felt intimate and strange. They were riding toward marriage, but they were still strangers. Still learning the shapes of each other's edges. "How did you know about me?" she asked. "About us?" I asked around. Thomas filled a canteen from the stream. "When I decided I needed a wife, I didn't want to just pick someone at a dance or a social. I wanted someone who understood what frontier life actually costs." He handed her the canteen. "The store owner in town, Harris, mentioned your father's situation. Said you were a good woman in a hard spot. So I came to see for myself, and if you hadn't liked what you saw, then I'd have paid your father's debt anyway and ridden on." Clara drank deeply, cold water shocking and welcome. "Why?" "Because it would have been the decent thing to do." They remounted and rode on, the trail growing steeper, the forest thicker. Clara thought about decency and desperation. About a man who'd pay a stranger's debt without expectation. About the difference between charity and partnership. As afternoon shadows lengthened, they came to a small cabin in a meadow, weathered but solid, its roof mostly intact. "Line shack," Thomas explained, dismounting. "Shelter for ranch hands working cattle in high country. I've used it before. It's safe." The cabin was a single room with a stone fireplace and rough wooden floor. Thomas built a fire while Clara unpacked their provisions. The domesticity of it felt strange, this carefully maintained distance between two people who would be married by law but remain strangers in truth. Thomas cooked beans and bacon in a battered pan, the smell making Clara's stomach clench with hunger. They ate sitting on opposite sides of the fire, the silence between them not quite comfortable but not hostile either. "Just careful, tomorrow we'll reach the ranch," Thomas said finally. "I want you to understand something before we get there." Clara set down her plate. "I'm listening. I live simply. Work hard. Don't keep fancy things or put on airs. The ranch is remote, we might not see another soul for weeks at a time in winter." He stared into the fire, his profile sharp in the flickering light. "It's not an easy life. But it's an honest one. And if you give it a chance, you might find it matters to you too." "And if I don't?" Clara asked quietly. "If I can't bear the isolation or the work or," she hesitated. "Or you, then in a year, like I promised, you're free to go. I'll stake you enough money to start fresh somewhere. Denver, California, back east if you want. Wherever you think you can build the life you're looking for." Thomas turned to face her. "But I'll ask you to give it a genuine try. Not just endure, but actually try to make it work. That's the bargain." "Why a year?" "Because anything less and you're just surviving. A year gives you time to see if you can actually live there." He paused. Big difference between the two, Clara thought about that. About surviving versus living. About the years she'd spent doing one while hoping for the other. "What do you want from this marriage?" she asked. "Really want?" Beyond the practical, Thomas was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was rough, almost raw. "I want to stop being alone. I want to wake up and hear someone else breathing. No, I'm not the only human for miles. I want conversation over breakfast, even if it's just about weather or work. He stopped, struggling with words. I want to build something that matters with someone who understands why it matters. Is that enough of an answer? It's an honest one. They sat in silence for a while longer. Two strangers bound by necessity and choice, gambling on each other in the gathering dark. When it came time to sleep, Thomas spread his bedroll on one side of the cabin. Clara took the other. Her rifle within reach, as her father had insisted. The distance between them felt like both canyon and comfort. Clara. Thomas's voice came through the darkness. Yes, thank you. For saying yes. For trusting me enough to take the chance. Clara stared at rough-hewn ceiling beams barely visible in firelight. Thank you for asking honestly. For not pretending this was anything other than what it is. What do you think it is? She considered carefully. A beginning. Maybe a good one if we're lucky. Maybe just survival with better shelter. But either way, a beginning, I'll take that, Thomas said quietly, and then there was only the sound of the fire settling. Wind in the pines outside, and two people breathing in the darkness. Heading toward a future neither could see, but both had chosen to face together. Morning came with frost on the meadow and their breath visible in the cold air. They broke camp efficiently, their movements around each other growing slightly less careful. Not comfort yet, but the beginning of routine. The trail climbed higher, winding through mountain passes where pines grew twisted and sparse. Clara's muscles protested every mile, but she gritted her teeth and rode on. Determined not to slow them down. Not to be the weak link Thomas might regret choosing. Around noon, they crested a ridge. Thomas drew his horse to a stop. There, he said simply, pointing down into a valley that opened below them like a secret. Clara followed his gaze and felt her breath catch. The valley was broader than she'd expected, sheltered by mountains on all sides. A river ran silver through the center, and meadows still showed traces of autumn gold. She could see cattle, dozens of them, grazing peacefully, but it was the buildings that made her stare, not a rough cabin, but a substantial lodge. 2 stories of timber and stone. Outbuildings that spoke of prosperity, not poverty. Fences in good repair. Fields showing signs of careful management. This wasn't survival. This was wealth. That's your ranch? Clara's voice came out strange. Accusatory. That's home. Something cold settled in Clara's chest. Not the relief she should have felt, seeing security spread before her. But fear, because she'd seen wealth before. Daniel Vance's wealth. The kind that made men think they could own things. Own people. The kind that had driven a boy to suicide when he couldn't possess what he wanted. You lied to me. Her hands tightened on the reins. I never lied. Thomas turned in his saddle to face her. I never said I was poor. You assumed, and I let you assume, because you wanted someone desperate enough to say yes. I wanted someone who'd value the partnership for what it was, not the money behind it. His voice stayed level. I wanted someone who'd choose me before they knew what I had. Because I've learned that wealth brings out the worst in people. Makes them see dollar signs instead of humans. Clara felt something break open in her chest. Not anger exactly. Terror. I can't do this. The words tumbled out. I can't be here. I can't. She wheeled her horse around, ready to bolt back down the trail. But Thomas's voice stopped her. Clara. Wait, for what? For you to explain how this isn't exactly what I ran from 15 years ago. How you're different from, who? Thomas demanded. Who did you run from? And Clara told him. About Daniel Vance and his wealth and his proposal and the way she'd felt like something to be purchased. About the refusal that killed him. About the guilt that had followed her ever since. I caused a man's death once by refusing wealth, she finished, her voice shaking. I won't let pride destroy me again. I can't be responsible for what? Thomas's voice gentled. For my choices. Clara, I'm not Daniel Vance. I'm not asking you to be owned. I'm asking you to be a partner. That's what they all say, then judge me by my actions, not your fears. Thomas dismounted and moved to stand beside her horse, looking up at her with those tired, honest eyes. I could have told you I was wealthy. Could have swept in like some hero and made you feel grateful. But I didn't. I offered you a bargain between equals. And everything I promised still stands, but nothing. His voice firmed. You want to leave? Leave. The money I gave your father is his regardless. You owe me nothing. He paused. But if you run now, you're not running from me. You're running from Daniel Vance's ghost. And Clara, he doesn't get to control your life anymore. He's been dead 15 years. It's time to let him go. The words hit like a slap and a liberation all at once. Clara stared down at this man who'd been honest about his flaws, who'd confessed to causing his wife's death, who stood in the shadow of his own wealth offering her freedom to leave. He was right. God damn him, he was right. If I stay, she said slowly, I stay as your equal. Not your employee. Not your grateful charity case. Not your rescued victim. Your partner, agreed, and no more secrets. No more letting me assume. If there's something I need to know, you tell me straight, agreed, and I keep the rifle. The ghost of a smile touched Thomas's face. Wouldn't dream of asking you to give it up. Clara took a deep breath, let it out slowly. Then I guess we'd better ride down there and see exactly what I've gotten myself into. They descended into the valley together, side by side now instead of single file. Clara's fear still present, but her determination stronger. She'd jumped off cliffs before. Survived the fall. Maybe she'd survive this one too. As they rode into the ranch yard, an older man emerged from the barn. Weathered face, sharp eyes beneath bushy gray brows. He took in Clara with one swift glance, then looked at Thomas with something between question and approval. So you did it, the man said. Brought home a wife, Clara, this is Samuel Garrett, my foreman. Samuel, this is Clara Whitmore, soon to be Clara Merrick, if she doesn't change her mind in the next few hours. Samuel studied Clara with the same careful assessment Thomas had used in her father's cabin. You know what you're getting into, miss? I'm learning, Clara said dryly. That earned her something that might have been a smile. Well, you've got fire in you at least. You'll need it, he turned back to Thomas. Someone came by yesterday. Looking for you. Said he'd be back. Every line of Thomas's body went tense. Who? Your brother. Marcus, and just like that, Clara understood. The wealth wasn't freedom. It was another kind of cage. And whatever she'd ridden into, it was far more complicated than she'd imagined. The battle, she realized, hadn't even begun yet. The name hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Marcus. Thomas's brother. The way Thomas's shoulders had gone rigid, the way Samuel's expression had darkened, Clara knew a threat when she saw one. Even when she didn't understand its shape yet. When did he leave? Thomas's voice had gone flat, carefully controlled, this morning. Early. Samuel's eyes flicked to Clara, then back to Thomas. He wasn't alone. Had two men with him. Lawyers, from the look of them. Asked a lot of questions about your whereabouts, your state of mind, your recent decisions. The foreman's mouth tightened. I told them nothing. But they'll be back, Thomas. And when they hear you've married, they'll use it as ammunition. I know. Thomas dismounted in one fluid motion, then moved to help Clara down. His hands on her waist were brief, impersonal, but she felt the tension vibrating through him. How much time do we have? Days. Maybe less. Samuel took the horse's reins. I'll see to these. You should take your wife inside, explain things before Marcus returns with his legal circus, wife. The word felt strange, premature. They weren't married yet, wouldn't be until they could reach a judge. But Samuel spoke it like it was already true, already binding. Clara followed Thomas toward the lodge, her rifle across her back, her bag in hand. Behind them, Samuel led the horses away, leaving them alone in the yard as afternoon light slanted gold across the valley. The heavy door swung open, and Clara stepped across the threshold into her new life. The interior took her breath, not because of luxury, though there was quality in every beam and stone, but because of care. The great room stretched before her, dominated by a massive fireplace. Shelves lined the walls, holding books and practical tools in equal measure. Furniture built for use, not display. Windows positioned to catch light without wasting heat. It was a home built by someone who understood the difference between wealth and ostentation. Kitchens through there. Thomas gestured, his voice still tight with whatever tension Marcus's name had triggered. Pantries stocked for winter. 3 bedrooms upstairs, you can take whichever one suits you best. Separate bedrooms. Clara said it as fact, not question, of course. Thomas's tone suggested the question was almost insulting. I told you this wasn't about the usual reasons men take wives. I meant it. Clara set down her bag, her exhaustion suddenly crashing over her. 2 days of riding, 1 night of broken sleep, and now this, wealth and threats and a brother whose name made Thomas Merrick look like he was preparing for war. Tell me, she said quietly. Tell me everything. About Marcus. About why you really needed a wife. About what I've actually agreed to. Thomas was silent for a long moment. Then he moved to the fireplace, knelt to build a fire. His movements were practiced, efficient, the kind of ritual that gave a man time to gather words. My brother Marcus is a businessman. Timber, cattle, mining, he's built an empire in Denver over the past 20 years. Thomas struck a match, watched kindling catch flame. He's also drowning in debt he can't admit to having. Bad investments, risky ventures that didn't pay off, using family trust funds without authorization to cover his losses, and he needs your money to save himself. He needs my cooperation. My signature on documents that would merge my assets with his, give him control over this ranch and the wealth my father left me. Thomas stood, brushing soot from his hands. When my father died 5 years ago, he left everything to me. The ranch, the money, complete independence. Marcus has been trying to claw back control ever since. Why? You're his brother, because Marcus believes family legacy means centralized power. One empire, one leader, one vision. Thomas's voice carried old anger. My father disagreed. He believed in independence, in building something good instead of something big. Marcus hated him for it, hated that his younger brother succeeded without bowing to family pressure, without playing by society's rules. Clara moved to warm her hands by the growing fire. And now Marcus wants to prove you're incompetent to manage your inheritance, conservatorship proceedings. Thomas's jaw tightened. He's been building a case for months. Claims I'm isolated, mentally unstable, making poor decisions. That I need family oversight to protect me from myself, and to protect the family assets from my negligence. Is that why you needed a wife? To prove you're not isolated, partly. Thomas met her eyes. But also because I knew he'd see a hasty marriage as evidence of impaired judgment. Would use it to strengthen his case. Look, my brother's so desperate and delusional, he married a stranger in the mountains. The cold settled deeper into Clara's chest. You used me. You needed a weapon against your family, and I was convenient. No. Thomas's voice sharpened. I needed a partner strong enough to stand against people who will try every tactic, legal, social, financial, to break us apart. I needed someone who couldn't be bought off or intimidated. Someone who'd already survived things Marcus can't imagine. He paused. I needed you, Clara. Specifically you. Not just any desperate woman. You, Clara wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that this was partnership, not manipulation. But Daniel Vance's ghost whispered in her ear, men lie. Especially when they need something. What happens when Marcus returns? He'll offer you money to leave. A lot of money. Enough to secure your future, care for your father, start over anywhere you want. Thomas's expression was grim. And he'll make it sound reasonable. Like he's saving you from a mistake. Like I'm the problem, not him, and if I take it, then I face him alone. Probably lose the ranch. Watch everything my father built get absorbed into Marcus's empire and strip mine for profit. Thomas's voice went quiet. But Clara, that's still your choice to make. I promised you freedom, and I meant it. Even if it costs me everything. The honesty of it struck Clara harder than any pretty words could have. This man was offering her an exit before she'd even fully entered. Showing her the trap door before springing the trap. I need to think. Clara heard the exhaustion in her own voice. I need sleep. And I need time to understand what I'm actually facing, upstairs. Second door on the right. Thomas moved toward the staircase. There are clothes in the wardrobe, my mother's things. She was about your size. Use whatever you need. Clara climbed the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. At the landing, she paused. Thomas, he looked up from the fire he was tending. Yes, your wife. Evelyn. You said you killed her by refusing treatment. What did you mean? The question landed like a stone. Thomas's face went carefully blank. Tomorrow, he said. I'll tell you tomorrow. Right now, you need rest. We both do. It wasn't an answer, but Clara was too tired to push. She found the bedroom, simple but comfortable, with a real bed and a window facing east toward the mountains, and closed the door behind her. Alone for the first time in days, she let herself shake. Clara woke to screaming, not fully awake, not conscious thought, just the sound of a man's voice crying out in anguish, raw and broken. She grabbed the rifle from beside the bed and ran into the hallway, heart pounding. Thomas's door stood open. In the moonlight spilling through his window, she could see him thrashing in bed, sheets tangled around him like bonds. Evelyn, please. The words tore from his throat. Please forgive me. I killed you. I killed our child. Clara froze in the doorway. This was private, intimate, the kind of nightmare a man should suffer alone. But his voice carried such agony that she found herself moving forward. Setting the rifle down, reaching for his shoulder. Thomas. Wake up. He jerked awake with a gasp, his eyes wild and unfocused. For a moment he didn't seem to know where he was. Then recognition filtered in, followed by shame. Clara. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. How long? She asked quietly. How long have you been having these nightmares? Thomas sat up slowly, running shaking hands through his hair. 3 years. Since the day they died. Footsteps in the hall. Samuel appeared, holding a lamp, his face creased with concern and resignation. He saw Clara and something shifted in his expression. He's been like this since it happened, Samuel said, his voice heavy. Most nights. Sometimes worse. The old foreman looked at Clara with tired eyes. You should know what you're getting into, Mrs. Merrick. I'm not Mrs. Merrick yet, near enough. Samuel set the lamp on the table. And near enough that you deserve the truth. He turned to Thomas. Tell her. All of it. She's going to hear it from Marcus anyway, better she hears it from you first. Thomas stared at the floor, his shoulders bowed under invisible weight. Not now, Samuel. Yes, now. The foreman's voice firmed. Before Marcus arrives with his version. Before the lawyers twist it into something even worse than it was, Clara found herself sitting on the edge of Thomas's bed, uninvited but necessary. Tell me, so Thomas told her, about Evelyn, his first wife. Beautiful and educated, from a good family. About their marriage 6 years ago, built on love and hope and all the promises young people make, about the pregnancy. Evelyn's fear. The complications that started early, bleeding, pain, warning signs the midwife recognized, about Evelyn begging to go to Denver, to see a real doctor, to get help before it was too late, about Thomas refusing. I was a lawyer then, he said, his voice hollow. Practiced in Denver, made good money. But I'd been raised to believe certain things about marriage. About duty. About the natural order. His hands clenched into fists. My father had taught me that a woman's primary purpose was bearing children. That fear and weakness were things to overcome, not accommodate. Clara felt cold spreading through her chest. Evelyn was terrified. Thomas continued. Crying, begging, telling me something was wrong. But I told her, his voice cracked. I told her she was being hysterical. That women had babies all the time. That she just needed to be strong. Samuel's voice came from the doorway, flat and damning. I was there when she begged. I watched it happen. Heard her screaming in that cabin, heard the midwife saying there was nothing she could do without proper medical tools. Watched Thomas standing outside, still refusing to take her to Denver because he thought he knew better. Samuel, Thomas's voice was broken. No. The foreman's tone was hard. She deserves to know. Evelyn died after 18 hours of labor. The baby, a boy, died too. Never drew breath. Samuel's eyes held Thomas's. And I said nothing. Did nothing. Because I was a coward who didn't want to lose my job. The silence that followed was vast and terrible. Clara stared at Thomas Merrick, this man she'd agreed to marry, this man who'd confessed to murder and she'd taken it as metaphor. But it wasn't metaphor. It was literal truth. He'd let his wife and child die because his pride mattered more than their lives. Why are you telling me this? Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. Because Marcus will tell you tomorrow. When he arrives, Samuel said. And he'll use it to prove Thomas is dangerous. Unstable. That his judgment can't be trusted. That you're just another woman he's putting at risk. Maybe he's right. Clara stood, needing distance. Maybe I am, Clara. Thomas reached for her, then stopped, hand falling. I won't justify what I did. Can't justify it. I was wrong. Criminally, morally, completely wrong. And I've spent 3 years trying to learn from it. Trying to become someone different, have you? The question came out sharp. Or are you just alone now because no one will risk being near you? The blow landed. Thomas flinched like she'd struck him. That's fair, he said quietly. That's more than fair. And if you want to leave, I understand. The money's still yours. No obligations. No guilt. Clara's mind raced. Daniel Vance had killed himself because she refused to be owned. Thomas Merrick had killed his wife by refusing to listen. 2 men, 2 deaths, 2 kinds of pride that destroyed everything they touched, and here she stood, caught between them. Between the ghost of a boy who'd loved possessing, and the reality of a man who'd possessed until it murdered. I need air. She turned toward the door. Clara, don't. She didn't look back. Just, don't. She walked out into the night, into cold air that shocked her lungs. The valley spread below in moonlight. Beautiful and deceiving. Wealth that looked like freedom but might just be another cage. Behind her, she heard Samuel's voice, low and urgent. You should have told her yourself. Before the nightmares. Before I had to, I know. Thomas's voice was barely audible. I know. Clara walked until she found herself in the barn, surrounded by horses and hay and the simple smells of animal life. She sat down in an empty stall and let herself shake, not from cold. From the weight of choices she didn't know how to make. She must have dozed, because she woke to find a blanket draped over her shoulders and pale dawn light filtering through the barn's cracks. And sitting across from her, back against the opposite wall, was a girl, young, 16, maybe 17. Pregnant, her belly obvious beneath a worn dress. Dark hair, wary eyes, and the defensive posture of someone expecting to be told to leave. I'm Rose, the girl said. Samuel's granddaughter. I live in the bunkhouse. She paused. You're the new wife, not yet. Clara pulled the blanket tighter. Maybe not ever, because of what he did to Evelyn. Clara looked at her sharply. You know about that? Everyone knows. Small valley. Lots of time to talk. Rose's hand moved to rest on her belly. But you should know, after Evelyn died, Mr. Merrick changed. Gave up law, gave up society, gave up everything. Came up here to punish himself. Is that supposed to make it better? No. Just true. Rose shifted her weight. I'm pregnant. Unmarried. The father was a ranch hand who took money from Marcus Merrick to disappear. $20 and a promise to never come back. Clara felt something twist in her chest. Why are you telling me this? Because when Marcus came here last year and saw me, he told Thomas to get rid of me. Said I was a moral stain on the property. Said decent ranches didn't keep ruined girls around. Rose's voice stayed steady, but her eyes were bright. Thomas told him no. Said this was my home as long as I needed it. Fought with his own brother to keep me safe. Rose, I'm not saying he's a good man, Mrs. Merrick. I'm saying he's trying to be better. The girl stood awkwardly, her pregnancy making her movements careful. That's more than most men do. She left Clara alone in the barn, with dawn breaking and choices pressing down like physical weight. Clara found Thomas in the kitchen, making coffee with the automatic movements of someone who performed this ritual too many times alone. He looked up when she entered, his face haggard. I'll hitch the wagon, he said quietly. Take you back to your father. The money's yours. No questions, no, no. Clara crossed to the stove, poured herself coffee. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice stayed firm. I'm not leaving. Not yet. Thomas stared at her. After what you learned, I learned you're a man who made a terrible mistake and has spent 3 years trying to atone for it. She met his eyes. I'm not saying I forgive you. I'm not saying I trust you. But I understand guilt, Thomas. I understand living with ghosts. She paused. Daniel Vance didn't just kill himself because I refused him. He killed himself because I refused to be owned. And his family made sure I knew I was responsible. That's not the same. Isn't it? Clara's voice sharpened. You owned Evelyn through pride and ignorance. Daniel tried to own me through emotional manipulation. Both of you valued possession over partnership. Both of you caused deaths. She set down her cup. The difference is, Daniel's dead and you're still here, trying to learn. Trying to be different. Thomas's face crumpled slightly. I don't deserve your understanding. I'm not offering understanding. I'm offering a question. Clara took a breath. Can you actually be different? Can you actually listen when someone tells you you're wrong? Can you give me real power in this partnership, not just pretty words, yes. No hesitation. I don't know how to prove it except through time. Through choices. But yes, then I'm staying. For now. Clara straightened. But Thomas, if you ever make me feel owned instead of partnered, I'm gone. And I'll make sure everyone knows why. That's more than fair. They stood in the kitchen's morning light, two damaged people trying to build something from their ruins. It wasn't trust yet. Maybe wouldn't be for a long time. But it was possibility. The sound of horses interrupted the moment. Multiple riders, approaching fast. Samuel burst through the door. Marcus is here. And he brought an army. Clara counted 5 horses in the yard. 5 men in expensive traveling clothes, their mounts steaming from hard riding. Leading them was a man who could only be Marcus Merrick, older than Thomas by perhaps 15 years. With the same tall frame but more weight, more presence. The kind of man who'd learned to dominate rooms. Beside him sat a younger man, maybe 30, with Marcus's features but softer. And behind them, 3 others who radiated the particular arrogance of city lawyers accustomed to winning. Thomas stepped onto the porch, Clara beside him. Samuel flanked them like a guard, Marcus dismounted with practiced ease. His eyes swept over Clara, assessing, dismissing, cataloging, in less than a second, brother. His voice was smooth, almost kind. Which made it more dangerous. I see the rumors are true. You've brought home a guest, a wife, Thomas corrected. Clara Whitmore. Soon to be Clara Merrick. How unexpected. How very irregular. Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. Miss Whitmore, I'm Marcus Merrick. Thomas's older brother. I wonder if you understand what you've stepped into. I'm learning quickly. Clara kept her voice level. I'm sure you are. Marcus's tone suggested he understood everything about her, her poverty, her desperation, her opportunism. Tell me, Miss Whitmore, what were the circumstances of your meeting my brother? He came to my father's homestead. Made an honest offer. I accepted. Clara felt Thomas tense beside her but kept going. Nothing irregular about two practical people making a practical choice. Practical. Marcus tasted the word. Is that what we're calling it? I might call it opportunistic. A poor farmer's daughter suddenly elevated through a hasty marriage to an isolated man who hasn't been thinking clearly for years. Marcus, Thomas's voice carried warning. I'm simply trying to understand, brother. Trying to determine if this young woman knows what she's doing, or if she's being taken advantage of. Or perhaps, his eyes found Clara again. Doing the taking advantage herself. Be very careful, Clara said quietly. How you finished that sentence. Something flickered in Marcus's expression. Surprise, maybe, that she'd pushed back. Miss Whitmore, forgive me. I'm concerned about my brother. Surely you can understand that. He pulled papers from his coat. I've been documenting concerning behaviors for some time. Isolation. Withdrawal from family and society. Refusal to participate in reasonable business opportunities. And now, this sudden marriage to a woman of. He paused delicately. Questionable background. My background is poverty, Mr. Merrick. Not crime, of course. But poverty makes people desperate. And desperate people make dangerous choices. Marcus's voice dripped false sympathy. I'm sure Thomas told you about Evelyn. About how his judgment killed his first wife. Are you truly willing to risk becoming another casualty of my brother's impaired decision-making? Clara felt Thomas go rigid beside her. Felt the weight of last night's confession pressing down. I know what happened to Evelyn, she said clearly. Thomas told me himself. Took responsibility for it. That's more than most men would do, took responsibility. Marcus laughed, the sound ugly. He confessed to killing his wife, and you see that as a positive quality. I see it as honesty. As someone who learned from a terrible mistake. Clara stepped forward. What I don't see is why you're here. This is Thomas's home. His life. His choice who he marries, not if he's incompetent to make that choice. Marcus gestured to his lawyers. We're filing for emergency conservatorship. My brother needs protection, from his own poor judgment, and from those who would exploit it. The younger man, Marcus's son, Clara realized, spoke for the first time. She refused $20,000, father. In town, when you offered, Marcus's eyes sharpened. Did she now? How interesting. Holding out for more, perhaps, no. Clara's voice stayed steady though her heart pounded. I refused because I keep my promises. Thomas and I made an agreement. I'm honoring it, how noble. Marcus's tone made nobility sound like stupidity. But Miss Whitmore, let me be frank. Thomas is not well. He hasn't been well since Evelyn died. And this marriage, this desperate grabbing at companionship, is evidence of his deteriorating state. He pulled out another paper. We have medical testimony. Witness statements. Legal precedent. Within a month, I'll be appointed conservator of my brother's affairs. The marriage will be annulled. And you'll be left with nothing, unless, the younger Merrick added, you accept our offer now. $30,000. A position in Denver, governess for my sister's children. Respectable work, independent income, your father cared for. He leaned forward. All you have to do is admit this marriage was a mistake. Leave quietly. Sign a statement that Thomas acted impulsively, $30,000. More money than Clara had dreamed existed. Enough to save her father, start over. Never worry about poverty again. Security wrapped in a contract, offered by men who smiled while they threatened. She thought about Daniel Vance's wealth, how it had tried to buy her. She thought about Thomas's confession last night, his nightmares, his guilt. She thought about Rose in the barn, about Samuel's regret, about all the broken people trying to heal in this valley, and she thought about what kind of person she wanted to be. No, Clara said. I made a commitment. I keep my commitments. Marcus's face hardened, all pretense of kindness gone. Then you're making the biggest mistake of your life. And when we take this ranch, when we prove Thomas incompetent, when your marriage is exposed as the sham it is, you'll have nothing. No money. No home. No dignity. Just poverty and regret, maybe, Clara said. But I'll have kept my word. Marcus stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to his lawyers. File the paperwork. Emergency hearing. Push for immediate conservatorship. He looked back at Thomas. You've chosen your side, brother. Now live with the consequences. They left in a thunder of hooves, leaving silence and threat behind. Clara felt her legs go weak. Samuel caught her elbow, steadying her. That was the bravest damn thing I've seen in 40 years, the foreman said. But Thomas was looking at Clara with something like awe and terror mixed. You turned down $30,000. I did. Why? Clara met his eyes. Because some things matter more than money. And if I'd taken his offer, I'd have proven him right, that I'm just another desperate woman who can be bought. She paused. I refuse to be that person. Thomas reached for her hand, hesitated, then took it anyway. Thank you, don't thank me yet. Clara squeezed his fingers once, then let go. The real fight hasn't even started. Inside the lodge, they found Samuel waiting with hard truth. Marcus will be back with lawyers and a court date within a week. We need to prepare. We need strategy. He looked at Clara. We need to make this marriage legal before he can challenge it. Tomorrow. We ride to town and find a judge, tomorrow. Clara's voice came out faint. Tomorrow, Samuel confirmed. Because every day we wait is a day Marcus can use against us. Clara looked at Thomas, at this man who'd killed his wife and somehow learned to hate himself for it. At this complicated, damaged person offering her partnership built on ruins. Tomorrow then, she heard herself say, and sealed her fate. They left for town before dawn, riding through mountain darkness with lamplight to guide them. Clara wore the blue wool dress Samuel's wife Martha had altered overnight, simple but respectable, borrowed dignity for a borrowed life. Thomas rode beside her, silent and tense. Samuel flanked them like a guard, rifle across his saddle. The trail descended through pine forest into broader valleys, the world emerging from shadow as they rode. Clara's mind kept returning to the previous night, to Marcus's cold certainty, to $30,000 refused, to the choice she'd made that felt both brave and terrifying. You're quiet, Thomas said, breaking hours of silence, thinking about what comes next. After we're married. What his next move will be. He'll file for conservatorship. Try to prove I'm incompetent. Thomas's voice was matter-of-fact, discussing strategy rather than fear. Bring witnesses who'll testify to erratic behavior. Our sudden marriage will be his primary evidence, impulsive. Poorly considered, proof of declining judgment, so by marrying you, I've given him exactly what he needs, you've given him what he expects. But you're not what he expects. Thomas glanced at her. He's assuming a frightened girl he can intimidate or buy. Instead, he got someone who understands hardship better than he ever will. Who won't be impressed by wealth or intimidated by lawyers. You keep saying that. But you don't know if I'm strong enough. I watched you refuse $30,000 without hesitation. That strength most people never find. Thomas paused. Clara, whatever happens in that courtroom, know this, I chose you because I needed someone who'd already survived worse than anything Marcus can threaten. And you have. Clara thought about her father dying in a cold cabin. About Daniel Vance's suicide and 15 years of blame. About poverty that taught you to apologize for existing. Thomas was right, she'd survived worse. But survival and victory were different things. They reached town as morning broke fully, a small settlement serving scattered ranches and mining claims. The courthouse was modest timber and stone, its flag hanging limp in still air. Judge Morrison was already in his chambers, Samuel having sent word ahead. An older man, weathered by frontier life, with eyes that missed nothing. He looked at Marcus, then at Thomas, then at Clara with particular interest. "This is highly irregular," he said, reviewing the documents Thomas had brought. "A marriage performed in haste, between strangers, with family opposition documented." His gaze sharpened on Clara. "Miss Whitmore, do you understand what you're entering into?" "Yes, Your Honor. Do you understand that Marcus Merrick was here yesterday, expressing concerns about this union? That he's filing for emergency conservatorship of his brother's affairs? I understand that Marcus Merrick is a man whose empire is crumbling, and he needs his brother's assets to save himself." Clara kept her voice level. "And I understand that he'll use any tactic, including this marriage, to build his case." Judge Morrison's eyebrows rose. "Strong words, true words. Ask him about his financial troubles. About the family trust funds he's been misusing. About why he's so desperate to control property that isn't his." The judge studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to Thomas. "Mr. Merrick, do you enter into this marriage of your own free will, understanding its legal obligations?" "I do. And you, Miss Whitmore?" Clara thought about her father's cabin, about the Calhoun brothers, about 15 years running from Daniel Vance's ghost. She thought about Thomas's nightmares and his honesty. About Rose in the barn and Samuel's regret. About building something real instead of running from fear. "I do." The ceremony was brief. No romance, no poetry, just legal requirements and necessary questions. Judge Morrison read the words, had them sign the register. Samuel and the judge's clerk served as witnesses. Within 10 minutes, Clara Whitmore became Clara Merrick. Bound by law to a man who'd killed his first wife. Partner in a fight she was only beginning to understand. "Congratulations," Judge Morrison said, but his tone was grave. "Though I suspect congratulations are premature." He looked at Thomas directly. "Marcus was very persuasive yesterday. Very convincing about your mental state, your isolation, your questionable judgment. He'll be back with lawyers and medical testimony. You understand that?" "I do." "Then I'll tell you what I told him. I'll need substantial proof before considering such a serious action as conservatorship." "But Mr. Merrick, if he provides that proof?" The judge shook his head. "Protect yourself. Both of you." They left quickly, not wanting to linger where Marcus might have watchers. The ride back felt longer, heavier. Clara kept glancing at the simple gold band on her finger. Thomas's mother's ring, he'd said. A piece of history she hadn't earned, wearing weight she wasn't sure she could carry. Regrets? Thomas asked as they climbed back toward the high country. Questions. Not regrets. Clara met his eyes. What was she like? Your mother. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Tough. Fair. Completely unimpressed by pretension. She was a schoolteacher before she married my father. Educated, refined, but she chose frontier life over comfort. He smiled slightly. Marcus hated her. Thought she ruined his brother by encouraging his backward choices. Did she? She made him happy. Made him believe building something good mattered more than building something big. Thomas's voice softened. When she died, part of my father died too. He kept working, kept the ranch running, but the joy went out of it. Clara thought about partnership, about love built on respect rather than possession. About what it cost to lose someone who made life worth living. I'm not promising you that. Thomas said quietly, reading her thoughts. I want to be clear. But I am promising the partnership part. And if we're lucky. He trailed off. If we're lucky, maybe it becomes more, maybe. they rode on through morning sunshine, new husband and wife bound by law and necessity, still learning each other's shapes and edges, but peace shattered as they crested the final ridge. The ranch valley spread below, and in the yard sat 3 carriages. Expensive, imposing, horses still steaming from hard travel. Marcus had returned. And he'd brought an army. Steady, Thomas said quietly. Remember, stay calm, stay factual. Don't let them provoke you. They rode into the yard together, Samuel flanking them. The lodge's door stood open, voices carrying from inside, Martha's sharp and angry, Marcus's smooth and reasonable. Inside, the great room had been transformed into a makeshift courtroom. Marcus stood near the fireplace with his lawyers, both men holding thick folders. His son Richard lounged in a chair like he owned it. But it was the others that made Clara's stomach clench, a doctor in formal clothes, a woman in expensive dress who radiated society judgment, and 2 men who looked like they'd been hired specifically to intimidate. Martha stood near the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, fury radiating from her. I told them to wait outside, she said. They pushed past me like I was nothing. Mr. and Mrs. Merrick. Marcus's voice carried false warmth. How convenient. We were just discussing your absence. We don't require family present for legal proceedings. Thomas moved to stand in the center of his own home, reclaiming space. And you're trespassing. This is family business, Thomas. The ranch belongs to family legacy, which gives me certain rights of oversight. Marcus gestured to his assembled group. I've brought Dr. Raymond Whitmore, who specializes in mental competency evaluations. Mrs. Eleanor Thornton, a respected member of Denver society who can assess the propriety of your marriage. And witnesses who can testify to your recent behavior. I don't consent to any evaluation. Thomas's voice was hard. And I don't answer to your judgment about my marriage. Your consent isn't required when there's reasonable cause for concern. One of the lawyers, thin, severe, predatory, stepped forward with papers. We're filing for emergency conservatorship based on evidence of declining mental capacity, inability to manage substantial assets responsibly, and behavior indicating detachment from reality. What behavior? Clara heard herself ask, every eye turned to her. She felt the weight of their assessment, Marcus's calculation, Richard's contempt, Mrs. Thornton's disdain, the lawyer's professional cataloging of weaknesses, Mrs. Merrick. Mrs. Thornton's voice dripped condescension. Surely you understand the irregularity of this situation. Your husband has obligations, social, financial, familial, that require certain standards. His choice to marry someone of your background, without proper courtship or family approval suggests significant lapse in judgment. My background is poverty, Mrs. Thornton. Not crime. Not moral failure. Just the misfortune of being born without money. Clara kept her voice steady. And I fail to see how honest poverty makes me unsuitable for marriage. It makes you suspicious, Richard interjected. A young woman with nothing, suddenly elevated through hasty marriage to an isolated man who hasn't been thinking clearly. You refused $20,000. But you're holding out for the whole prize, the ranch, the wealth, everything. I refused because I keep my promises. Because partnership matters more than money. Clara felt anger rising but controlled it. That's not calculation. That's integrity, or clever manipulation, Marcus said smoothly. Mrs. Merrick, I don't blame you for seeing opportunity. Poverty makes people desperate. But you must understand, my brother is not well. He hasn't been well since his first wife died. This marriage is evidence of his deteriorating state. This marriage is evidence that 2 practical people made a practical choice. Clara moved to stand beside Thomas, physically demonstrating unity. Something you seem incapable of understanding. Dr. Whitmore cleared his throat, pulling attention. Mrs. Merrick, in your brief time with your husband, have you noticed any concerning behaviors? Paranoia, perhaps. Delusions about his family's intentions. Inappropriate fixation on perceived threats. Clara thought about Thomas's nightmares, his guilt, his 3 years of self-imposed isolation. She thought about honesty versus manipulation, about what would help him versus what would damn him. I've noticed a man protecting what he values from people trying to take it, she said carefully. That's not paranoia when the threat is real and standing in his living room, defensive hostility. Dr. Whitmore made notes. Common in cases of persecution complex, or common when strangers invade your home making accusations. Clara's voice sharpened. You're twisting normal responses into symptoms. That's not medical evaluation, that's character assassination. Marcus stepped forward, his patience clearly fraying. Enough. Mrs. Merrick, let me be frank with you. My brother killed his first wife through negligence and arrogance. He refused her medical care, chose his pride over her life. And now he's done the same to you, using you as a shield against family responsibility, putting you at risk for his own purposes. The words landed like blows. Clara saw Thomas flinch. Saw the guilt flood his face. I know what happened to Evelyn, Clara said quietly. Thomas told me everything. Took full responsibility. That's not the action of a man in denial, that's someone who's learned from terrible mistakes, or someone who's learned to manipulate through confession. Marcus's voice went cold. Mrs. Merrick, I'm going to make you one final offer. $40,000. A position in Denver with excellent references. Your father cared for the rest of his life. All you have to do is admit this marriage was a mistake and walk away. 40,000. The number hung in the air like temptation made solid. Clara felt the weight of it, security, independence. Freedom from this fight she barely understood. She thought about her father in his cabin, about the money she'd already sent. About what 40,000 could buy, doctors, comfort, years of peace. She thought about Daniel Vance's wealth trying to own her. About Thomas's honesty costing him everything. About Rose in the barn and Samuel's regret and all the broken people trying to heal, and she thought about what kind of person she wanted to be. No. Her voice was steady. I made a commitment. I keep my commitments. Marcus's face went rigid. Then you're condemning yourself along with him. When we prove his incompetence, when we take this ranch, when your marriage is annulled, you'll have nothing. Maybe, Clara said. But I'll have my integrity. Your integrity won't keep you warm in winter. Richard's voice was ugly with contempt. You're a fool, perhaps. Clara met his eyes. But I'm a fool who keeps her word. Mrs. Thornton stood, gathering her skirts. I've seen quite enough. This girl is clearly unstable, aggressive, completely unsuitable. Her very presence proves Thomas's impaired judgment. My presence proves he values strength over subservience. Clara stepped toward the woman. You call me unstable because I won't be bullied. You call me unsuitable because I don't defer to false authority. But what I actually am is someone who understands that wealth doesn't equal worth. That society approval doesn't equal morality. We're leaving. Marcus gestured to his entourage. But we'll be back with proper legal proceedings. Judge Morrison will see the evidence, the erratic behavior, the inappropriate marriage, the deteriorating judgment. And when he appoints me conservator, all of this ends. Let him try. Thomas's voice was quiet but absolute. I'm of sound mind, managing my property competently, and legally married to a woman who's my equal partner. Whatever case you build will collapse under scrutiny. Marcus stared at his brother for a long moment. Something like pain crossed his face, quickly masked. You've chosen her over family. A stranger over blood. I won't forget that. I've chosen integrity over greed. If that makes her more family than you, that says everything about who we each are. They left in a flurry of expensive coats and offended dignity. The sound of carriages rolling away felt like temporary reprieve, not victory. The silence that followed was profound. Martha brought coffee with shaking hands. Samuel stood by the door, watching the trail as if expecting immediate return. Thomas moved to the window, his shoulders tight with tension. Clara sat down heavily, adrenaline draining away. She'd just refused $40,000 to stand beside a man who'd killed his wife. It was possibly the bravest or most foolish thing she'd ever done. Thank you, Thomas said quietly, still facing the window. For staying. For standing with me, don't thank me yet. The real fight is coming. Samuel turned from the door. Court date will be within a week. Marcus will move fast, try to overwhelm us before we can organize defense. We need a lawyer. Good one, Catherine Wells, Thomas said. In Denver. She's been preparing for this, then we send for her tonight. And Clara, Samuel's eyes found hers. You need to learn everything about this ranch. The finances, the operations, the management. You need to be able to speak about it knowledgeably, prove you're a genuine partner. I'll teach her. Thomas finally turned from the window. Everything I know. They spent the afternoon in Thomas's study, surrounded by ledgers and documents. He walked Clara through 5 years of careful management, sustainable practices, consistent profits, responsible stewardship. Showed her the breeding program, the seasonal patterns, the balance that kept the ranch profitable without being extractive. Marcus will argue we should be running twice as many cattle, maximizing profit, Thomas explained. But that would destroy the land within a decade. Everything my father built was about long-term sustainability over short-term gain. Clara absorbed information like drought-parched ground absorbing rain. Asked questions, pushed for clarity. Refused to accept gaps in understanding. By evening, her head spun with numbers and systems, but she was beginning to see the full picture, not just a ranch, but a philosophy made manifest. That night, after Martha's dinner, after strategy sessions that ran late, Clara found herself unable to sleep. She stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the valley bathed in moonlight, thinking about the week ahead. A soft knock on her door broke the silence. Thomas stood in the hallway, also clearly unable to rest. Can I come in? He asked quietly. Clara nodded, and he entered, maintaining careful distance. Sat in the chair by the window rather than approaching the bed. I need to tell you something. He said. About Evelyn. About the day she died. Thomas, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because Marcus is going to present his version in court, and you need to hear mine first. His hands clenched into fists. Evelyn was terrified from the moment she learned she was pregnant. She'd seen her own mother die in childbirth, knew the risks. And when complications started early, she begged me to take her to Denver. Clara remained silent, letting him speak. I refused. Told her she was being hysterical, that women had babies all the time. I'd been raised to believe fear was weakness, that a woman's duty was bearing children regardless of personal cost. His voice broke slightly. I thought I was being strong. Teaching her strength. I was actually killing her. Samuel was there, Clara said quietly. Samuel was there. Watched me stand outside that cabin while Evelyn screamed. While the midwife begged for help she didn't have. While my wife and child died because I valued my pride more than their lives. Thomas looked at her with hollow eyes. After they buried them, I walked away from everything. My law practice, my family, society. Came up here to punish myself. Is that what you're doing? Punishing yourself, at first. But over 3 years, something changed. I started learning about the ranch, about the land, about building instead of destroying. Started understanding what my father had tried to teach me, that strength isn't domination. That partnership means listening, not commanding. He paused. I'll never stop carrying Evelyn's death. But I can try to honor it by becoming someone different, and that's why you needed me, Clara said. Someone strong enough to challenge you when you're wrong, yes. Because I can't trust my own judgment anymore. I need someone who'll tell me when I'm being arrogant, when I'm choosing pride over sense. His voice went rough. I need you, Clara. Not as property or possession, but as equal partner. As check on my worst instincts. Clara thought about his confession, his honesty, his 3 years of self-imposed exile learning to be different. She thought about Daniel Vance, who'd responded to refusal with suicide and blame. About the difference between men who learned and men who destroyed. I can't promise to love you, she said quietly. Not yet. Maybe not ever, I know, but I can promise to be honest with you. To challenge you when you're wrong. To stand with you when you're right." She paused. "Is that enough?" "It's more than I deserve." They sat in comfortable silence, moonlight painting the room in shades of silver and shadow. Two damaged people trying to build something from ruins. Not romance, not yet, but something potentially stronger, partnership forged in honesty and mutual need. "Get some sleep," Clara finally said. "We have a war to prepare for." Thomas stood to leave, paused at the door. "Clara? Whatever happens in that courtroom, whatever they accuse me of, it's all true. I did kill Evelyn. I did fail her. If Judge Morrison decides I'm incompetent, it won't be entirely wrong, maybe. But the question isn't whether you were wrong. You were. The question is whether you've learned." Clara met his eyes. "And Thomas, I think you have." He nodded once and left, closing the door softly behind him. Clara returned to the window, watching moonlight on mountains, thinking about the days ahead. About wealthy enemies and legal battles. About a man learning to be better and a woman learning to trust again. About partnership that might, if they were very lucky, become something more. The summons arrived 3 days later, delivered by a nervous clerk who apologized for the intrusion. Emergency conservatorship hearing, scheduled in 5 days. Judge Morrison had granted Marcus's petition for expedited proceedings. Catherine Wells arrived the next day, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who looked at Clara with frank assessment, then nodded as if satisfied. "You'll do," she said simply. "Marcus is expecting either a victim he can sympathize with or a villain he can vilify. You're neither. That confuses his narrative." They spent 2 days preparing. Catherine coached Clara on testimony, teaching her to answer questions clearly without being defensive. Taught her how to present herself as capable and practical rather than scheming or naive. "They'll try to make you angry," Catherine warned. "They'll question your motives, your background, your marriage. Don't give them emotional responses they can use against you." Samuel drilled her on ranch operations. Martha coached her on social interactions with wealthy people, the subtle ways they try to make her feel inferior, and Rose, pregnant, vulnerable Rose, sat with Clara in quiet moments, sharing her own story. How Marcus had wanted her gone. How Thomas had fought to keep her safe. "He's not perfect," Rose said. "But he's trying. That's more than most men do." The night before the hearing, Clara couldn't sleep. She found herself in the barn again, surrounded by horses and hay and simple smells. Found Thomas already there, sitting in the same stall where she'd first met Rose. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. He shook his head. "Thinking about tomorrow. About everything that could go wrong." Clara sat down across from him. "Thomas, I need to ask you something. And I need you to answer honestly, always. If I hadn't come along, if you'd faced Marcus alone, what would have happened?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "He would have won. Eventually. The isolation, the guilt, the nightmares, they were wearing me down. I was becoming what he claimed I was, unstable, incompetent, detached." He looked at her. "You gave me a reason to fight. Not just for the ranch, but for the chance to become someone better. What if I'm not strong enough?" You turned down $40,000 without hesitation. You stood in front of Marcus and his lawyers and refused to be intimidated. You learned 5 years of ranch management in 3 days. Thomas's voice was firm. "Clara, you're stronger than you know. Stronger than anyone expected. That's why we're going to win. You can't know that, no. But I can believe it. And I do." They sat in the barn until dawn, not speaking, just being present for each other. Two people facing battle together, finding strength in shared silence. When morning came, they dressed carefully. Thomas in his best suit, somber and respectable. Clara in a dress Martha had made overnight, deep blue wool, simple but dignified. Rose braided Clara's hair with careful hands, her own pregnancy making her movements slow. "You can do this," Rose whispered. "I know you can." The courthouse was packed when they arrived. Word having spread about the Merrick family drama. Wealthy families fighting over money and property made compelling entertainment. Clara felt the weight of watching eyes as they entered. Felt judgment and curiosity pressing down like physical force. Marcus was already seated with his legal team. Richard beside him, radiating smug confidence. Dr. Whitmore and Mrs. Thornton present as witnesses. And others Clara didn't recognize. More paid testimony, she assumed. Judge Morrison entered, and the room fell silent. His expression was grave, unreadable. "This is an emergency petition for conservatorship," he began. "A serious matter, taking control of a man's property and decisions. Mr. Peton, present your case." What followed was hours of careful legal maneuvering. Marcus's lawyer presented evidence of Thomas's erratic behavior, isolation, refusal to participate in family business, the sudden marriage. Dr. Whitmore testified about concerning personality traits suggesting detachment from reality. Mrs. Thornton spoke about social impropriety, the unsuitability of the marriage by society standards. Through it all, Clara sat beside Thomas, hands folded calmly, expression neutral. Catherine had warned her this would be difficult, hearing attacks on her character, questions about her motives. But hearing it spoken aloud in legal language, presented as fact rather than opinion, was harder than she'd anticipated. Then Richard took the stand, and his testimony was pure poison. "I've watched my cousin deteriorate for years," he said, voice heavy with false sadness. "Ever since his father died, he's withdrawn from family, from society, from anyone who might question his increasingly strange choices. He lives alone in the mountains, talking to ranch hands and animals more than people." He gestured at Clara with barely disguised contempt. "And then suddenly, he rides off and returns with this girl. A desperate nobody who saw opportunity. The whole thing reeks of impaired judgment and manipulation." "Objection," Catherine said calmly. "Speculation presented as evidence." "Sustained," Judge Morrison said. "Mr. Merrick, stick to observable facts." "The observable fact is my cousin married a stranger after one conversation. A poor woman with nothing to offer except need. That's not the action of a man thinking clearly." Clara felt Thomas tense beside her, but Catherine's warning hand kept him seated. Marcus's testimony was more sophisticated but equally damaging. He painted a picture of beloved nephew slipping away from reality, making poor decisions, surrounding himself with yes men. The hasty marriage was presented as culmination of declining competence. "I don't want to take his independence," Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly with apparent emotion. "But I can't stand by and watch him destroy himself and everything my brother built. The conservatorship isn't about control, it's about protection." It was masterful performance. Even knowing it was lies, Clara could see how convincing Marcus was, how reasonable his concern appeared. Then it was their turn. Catherine started with financial records. Walking the judge through 5 years of careful management. Presented testimony from the ranch's accountant, confirming sound decisions and responsible stewardship. "This is not the record of an incompetent man," Catherine said firmly. "This is evidence of exactly the opposite." Samuel testified about Thomas's hands-on involvement in ranch operations, his knowledge of cattle and land management, his fair treatment of workers. "He's the best rancher I've worked for in 40 years, Samuel said bluntly. "Smart, dedicated, principled. And this conservatorship isn't about protecting him, it's about stealing from him." "Objection," Marcus's lawyer stood. "Speculation about motives, I'll allow it," Judge Morrison said. "Continue, Mr. Garrett." Samuel leaned forward. "Marcus Reed has been trying to control this ranch for 5 years. Ever since his brother died. He's used every trick, legal pressure, social manipulation, financial schemes. And now he's using conservatorship as a weapon because nothing else worked." Martha testified about Thomas's daily competence, his sound judgment in ordinary decisions. Her fierce loyalty was clear, her testimony solid. Then Catherine called Clara to the stand. Clara walked forward, acutely aware of every eye in the courtroom. She was sworn in and took her seat, looking out at the packed room, at Marcus's cold judgment, at Thomas's encouraging nod. "Mrs. Merrick," Catherine began gently. "Tell us how you met your husband." Clara took a breath and told the truth. The whole truth, unvarnished and direct. Her father's illness, their desperate poverty, Thomas's honest proposal. The clarity of his offer, partnership, not romance. Her decision to accept because it was her best choice. He didn't lie about what he was offering, Clara said clearly. And I didn't lie about what I needed. We made an honest bargain between two practical people facing hard situations, and when you arrived at the ranch and discovered your husband was wealthy, I was frightened. Clara's honesty seemed to surprise the courtroom. Because I'd known wealth before. Knew what it made men think they could do, could own. I was afraid Thomas would be like, she stopped, then pushed forward. Like someone I'd known who couldn't accept refusal. Who was that? Clara hesitated, then decided. If they were going to judge her, they'd judge her on truth, Daniel Vance. He proposed marriage when I was 17. I refused. 3 days later, he killed himself. Left a note saying it was my fault. Her voice stayed steady though the words cut. His family made sure everyone knew I was responsible. I've lived with that guilt for 15 years. The courtroom was absolutely silent, so when you saw Thomas's wealth, you were afraid of repeating that pattern, yes. Afraid my refusal might cause another death. Afraid of being responsible for, Clara's voice cracked slightly. For another person I couldn't save, but you stayed. I stayed because Thomas wasn't like Daniel. He offered me choice, not ownership. He gave me power, not promises. He showed me partnership was possible. Clara looked directly at Marcus. And when your client offered me $40,000 to leave, I refused because I keep my commitments. Because some things matter more than money. Marcus's lawyer stood for cross-examination, his expression calculating. Mrs. Merrick, you admit you married for practical reasons rather than love. Doesn't that suggest mercenary motives? It suggests I'm practical. Most marriages on the frontier are practical arrangements. People partner for survival, for help managing land, for companionship in isolated circumstances. Clara kept her voice steady. Love is a luxury. Partnership is a necessity. You've been married less than a week. How can you claim to know your husband well enough to testify to his competence? I've spent every day learning about the ranch, about the business, about Thomas's management practices. I've studied 5 years of financial records, learned about cattle operations, observed his decision-making. Clara's voice firmed. In a week of intense focus, I've learned more about him than most people learn about their spouses in years of casual cohabitation, or you've been coached on what to say by people with vested interest in the outcome. I've been taught facts by people who actually work here and know how things operate, Clara shot back. As opposed to being taught lies by people who want to steal property they have no right to control. Mrs. Merrick, you're being hostile. I'm being honest. There's a difference. Judge Morrison's expression was unreadable, but Clara thought she saw approval in his eyes. When the lawyer finally dismissed her, Clara returned to her seat beside Thomas, her hands shaking but her head high. You were perfect, Thomas whispered, but the battle wasn't over. Marcus's lawyer called a surprise witness, a ranch hand who'd worked the previous summer. Paid testimony, Clara realized immediately, watching the man's nervous demeanor. He testified that Thomas had been strange, withdrawn, talking to himself, making irrational decisions about cattle placement. Catherine's cross-examination was brutal. And how much is Mr. Marcus Merrick paying you for this testimony? I'm not, I don't, you were fired from this ranch for theft, weren't you? And now Marcus has offered you money to lie in court. The man crumbled under questioning, admitting he'd been approached with an offer. Marcus's face went rigid with barely controlled anger, then Catherine played her final card. Your Honor, I'd like to call Rose Garrett to the stand. There was a stir in the courtroom as Rose stood, her pregnancy obvious, her youth heartbreaking. She walked forward with dignity, was sworn in, took her seat. Miss Garrett, Catherine said gently. Please tell the court your situation. Rose told her story. 16, pregnant, abandoned. How Marcus had come to the ranch and demanded Thomas remove her, called her a moral stain. How Thomas had refused, had fought his own brother to keep her safe. Mr. Merrick gave me a home when no one else would, Rose said, her voice steady despite tears. He paid for a midwife, prepared a cottage for after the baby comes. Never asked for gratitude, never made me feel like charity. She looked at Marcus. That man wanted me gone because I was inconvenient. Thomas Merrick protected me because it was right. Objection, Marcus's lawyer stood. This testimony is irrelevant to, it's absolutely relevant, Judge Morrison said sharply. It speaks to character, to judgment, to the pattern of behavior we're assessing. Sit down, Rose continued. I'm not saying Mr. Merrick is perfect. But he's trying to be better. And that's more than most men do. She paused. Especially more than men who'd throw out a pregnant girl to protect their own reputation. The impact of her testimony was visible. Even Marcus seemed shaken. Catherine's closing argument was devastating in its clarity. She laid out the evidence methodically, financial records proving competence, witness testimony confirming sound judgment, documentation of Marcus's own financial troubles. Your Honor, Marcus Reed isn't trying to protect his nephew, Catherine concluded. He's trying to protect himself from bankruptcy. Thomas Merrick's only crime is refusing to let his brother steal from him. And if this court allows conservatorship based on manufactured evidence and paid witnesses, it sets a dangerous precedent, that wealth and manipulation can overcome truth and competence. Marcus's closing was equally powerful, but Clara could see cracks in his performance now. Desperation showing through polished presentation, Judge Morrison called for recess. The waiting was torture, an hour that felt like days. When they were called back, Clara felt Thomas's hand find hers under the table. She squeezed once, offering what strength she had. Judge Morrison's face was grave. I've reviewed the evidence carefully. This court takes conservatorship petitions seriously, as they involve removing fundamental rights from a citizen. The burden of proof lies with the petitioner. He looked at Marcus directly. Mr. Marcus Merrick, you have failed to meet that burden. Clara felt Thomas go rigid beside her. The financial records show responsible management, Morrison continued. The witness testimony confirms sound judgment and capable decision-making. The marriage, while unusual in its circumstances, appears to be a legitimate partnership between two consenting adults making practical choices. His voice hardened. More concerning to this court is evidence suggesting this petition is motivated not by genuine concern for Mr. Thomas Merrick's welfare, but by the petitioner's own financial difficulties and desire to control assets he has no legal right to access. Marcus's face was turning red. This petition is denied. Mr. Thomas Merrick retains full control of his property and affairs. Furthermore, Judge Morrison's gaze was steel. I'm ordering an investigation into Mr. Marcus Reed's use of family trust funds, as evidence presented suggests possible misappropriation. This court will not be used to facilitate theft disguised as concern. The gavel struck. Final. Absolute, the courtroom erupted. Marcus was on his feet, shouting objections. Richard looked stunned. But through the chaos, Clara heard only one thing clearly, Thomas's breath releasing in a sob of relief. They'd won. Not just survived, but won. They stumbled out into afternoon sunshine. Clara's legs weak with reaction. Samuel was grinning, Martha was crying, Catherine was already planning appeals defense. We did it. Thomas's voice was filled with wonder. We actually did it. You did it, Catherine corrected. Both of you. That testimony about Daniel Vance, Clara, that's what shifted Morrison. He saw genuine trauma, genuine partnership. Not manipulation. They rode home as evening fell, golden light washing across the valley. The ranch spread below them, and Clara saw it with new eyes now, not just Thomas's home or a temporary refuge, but her home. The place she'd fought for, stood up for, claimed through courage rather than circumstance. That night, they gathered around the dinner table. Thomas, Clara, Samuel, Martha, Rose with her unborn child. Family not by blood, but by choice. By standing together when it mattered. Marcus will appeal, Samuel warned, but without heat. Men like him don't accept defeat gracefully. Let him try, Thomas said. With the investigation into his finances, he'll be too busy defending himself to attack us. They talked late into the evening, relief and triumph mixing with exhaustion. When they finally dispersed to bed, Thomas walked Clara to her door. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For everything. For refusing the money. For standing beside me in court. For being exactly who you are." Clara looked at this man who'd been stranger and ally and was becoming something more complex. "Thomas, I need to tell you something." "What?" "I'm not healed. From Daniel, from poverty, from 15 years of guilt. And you're not healed from Evelyn." She paused. "We're both still carrying ghosts, I know, but maybe," Clara took a breath. "Maybe we can carry them together. Maybe partnership means not healing each other, but healing alongside each other. I'd like that." Thomas reached for her hand, held it gently. "I'd like that very much." They stood in the hallway, hands joined, two damaged people choosing to build something from ruins. Not romance, not yet. But partnership deepening into trust. Alliance becoming affection. Practical love built on foundation instead of fantasy. "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Thomas." 6 months passed. Winter closed the valley, isolating them with snow and silence. But the isolation wasn't lonely, it was intimate. Long evenings by the fire, conversations that deepened past surface pleasantries, shared work that built understanding. Thomas taught Clara to read the land and animals. Clara taught Thomas that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that letting someone know you wasn't the same as losing yourself. Rose's baby came in February, a girl, healthy and loud. They named her Evelyn, and Thomas cried when he held her. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "And alive. And safe." Marcus's investigation continued. His empire collapsed. His crimes exposed. He wrote one letter to Thomas, no apology, but acknowledgement. "You were always the better man, brother." In spring, Clara received word. Her father had died peacefully in his sleep, the money she'd sent having bought him comfort in his final months. She grieved, but without guilt. She'd kept her promise. She'd survived. One evening in late May, Clara stood on the porch watching sunset paint the mountains gold. Thomas came to stand beside her, their comfortable proximity a far cry from the careful distance of those first weeks. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About that first night," Clara said. "When you came to my father's cabin. When you said you needed saving." "Did I save you, or did you save me?" "Neither." Clara took his hand. "We saved each other." Thomas turned to face her fully. "I love you, Clara Merrick. Not the romantic kind from storybooks, but the real kind. Built through work and trust and standing together when everything tried to tear us apart." Clara felt something warm bloom in her chest. "I love you too. And you're right, it's not storybook love. It's better. It's earned." He kissed her then, gentle and asking permission, and she kissed him back, choosing intimacy instead of fear, choosing partnership that had become love. Inside, Rose sang to baby Evelyn. Samuel and Martha laughed over cards. The ranch that had been Thomas's prison became their shared home. The wealth that had threatened became security they defended together, and two people who'd married as strangers, who'd carried ghosts and guilt and grief, learned that the best love was built from honesty. That partnership forged in fire was stronger than romance born from illusion, that winter bargains could become summer blessings, if two people were brave enough to choose each other day after day, in darkness and in light.